And I want to talk to this idea of what's called expand appearance, as well as show you what the Pathfinder tool can do. I think these are two really nice things to know, especially expand appearance. It's going to be a game changer when I show you expand appearance combined with the more advanced options that we'll get into in a bit. So I've got that line width, the branching vessel thing here. I've copied it and I've pasted it down here. But what I have here is, you'll notice that these two are different when I bring up outline mode. This one is still just a little line. I can change the weight again. But this one is actually a shape. So how the heck do we go from a line that there's no perimeter here? It's still just a line with a width. How do I go from a line to actually having this be a shape? Because I can do different things to shapes than what I can do to just lines in Illustrator. Well, it's this idea called expand appearance, and it's super useful. So I'm going to come here, copy, paste in place, move in orthogonal increments, doesn't matter. And I'm going to bring that over, shift it over again. And I want you to come up to here, and it will say object expand appearance. And I want you to watch what happens. So each of these are two separate lines. It's converted my stroke, my line, into actually being a full-fledged shape. Well, why is that important? This really helps me do things to shapes that I couldn't just do to a line. So this is just like if I had made some complex thing with the rectangle tool, the ellipse tool, whatever. It's basically a shape now. So why is that useful? Well, we can combine this with something that's called the Pathfinder tool. And so the Pathfinder tool, we'll get rid of this, go back to this one, is what allows you to fuse, to trim, and cut things however you want. So if I take this guy and paste him somewhere over here, doesn't matter, you'll notice over in the Properties panel, there's this thing called the Pathfinder tool. It's also very nice and useful because I can either unify this into one master object by coming over here, Shift M for the shape builder tool. I can click and drag. If I have a really complicated shape, that might be really infeasible for me to do, or if I have something that's really complex. Another option is the Pathfinder tool, where if I have something selected, say I got these two little vessels, I come over to the Pathfinder tool and I can just unite them. I click these things. Now everything is fused together. You can also pretty much every permutation of subtracting, dividing, and not, all this type of stuff is done in the Pathfinder tool. So I subtract out just the overlapping regions as one. Just play around with this thing. Only overlapping things stayed. Cut out the one in front. All different combinations are possible. So also things like divide. If I wanted to come back here, divide this, and then all of a sudden ungroup that, and I can trim these things around. So Pathfinder tool, really nice. It's an alternative to the shape builder tool, but it also lets you do some things like subtracting that are maybe a little bit more difficult depending on your shape. But at least knowing the Pathfinder tool is there, super helpful. So let's say I've made this big blood vessel thing, still kind of looks a little wonky. Other things that I can do are to change things like transparency and gradients. So let's say I want to show that the blood on the left side of this vessel is oxygenated, and then it's starting to transition and be more depleted of oxygen on the right hand side. Simple way to do that, I always refer to this as like red to blue, even though it's always red, right? You come over and you can select this shape. You'll go over to the gradient option, and you'll notice you have this big box that's available to change and select the color. Just like how we were changing the line weight with the line width tool, we can change the color from left to right. So gradients, again, not super complex. I think people are familiar with these. You can change, linear gradient, radial gradient. Now it looks like a bullseye, really good for circles. You can change if I wanted to have a stroke in here. Again, you can just play around with this. It's not terribly complicated, but at least knowing that I can shift where I want these things. If I want it to start at red at exactly halfway through, I can come in, location, and do that. And you'll notice the gradient is centering it between this. So if I had to guess, this is going to be 25% or 75% of the location. You can also change this as well. So it's changing, if you notice this portion down here, I can really start tweaking these things based off of what I want. So sometimes it is as simple as just throwing in a gradient from left to right and then just saying, well, let's try like 75%, who cares? These are the types of things that you can fool around with, but at least knowing they exist, pretty useful. Transparency, same idea. I think this is pretty simple. Come over here, click on this object. You have the transparency tab on the right-hand side. Click on this. You'll notice opacity 50%. I could make this 25%, make it really faint, 5%, who cares? Or if I want it to go back, it's like 100%. So opacity, this is changing the bulk of the entire thing. Another trick, something that can also throw people for a loop, is let's say I have a square and I want to have this in a red stroke. I'll make the stroke a little bit fatter so it's easier to see. There is a difference between using the transparency panel versus the appearance panel. The transparency panel is very straightforward. If I say 50%, both the stroke and the fill are 50% opacity. If I only wanted my stroke to be 50% opacity and the center, the fill, to be 100% opacity for black, you can actually also come down here and do it a little differently through the appearance panel. So the appearance panel is very useful. It's really showing you all the changes and functions that you have on a shape. So it's telling me I've got a stroke, that's 3 points. It's at 100% default opacity, same with the fill. What you can do is if you just want to change the stroke, I can click on it and I can say, make just the stroke 50% opacity. And you'll notice how that's changed. And I say, well, maybe I also want the stroke to come to the outside. Maybe I want it all the way inside. So all this stuff is at your control, just as a matter of you learning how to use these things and that they exist in the first place. So again, the stroke is now 50% opacity, but the fill is not. You can come back here, you can say like wipe the slate clean, just clear appearance. Everything's reset back to being basically no stroke or anything. So appearance panel, whenever you're confused as to like what the heck is on my shape or what like transformations I've done to it, always look at the appearance panel. It's this one over here. I will note, I've mentioned using hotkeys all the time. I think it's super useful. You should never be clicking on the ones on the left-hand column. I still click on the ones on the right-hand column. So these are more of the slightly more complex functions like transparency, where you're bringing up a panel anyway. Anything over on the left-hand side, shapes, text, whatnot, that's what I use hotkeys for, but I still think clicking on these is perfectly fine. So those are very basic things in Illustrator, like shapes. How to expand appearance is probably the most advanced one that we did there. We can start getting into the more advanced stuff. So 3D objects is another thing that Illustrator can do. And if you've used 3D CAD design to make a cube or a sphere or whatever, the premises here are the same. You take a thing like a shape, you revolve it, you can extrude it. Obviously there's limitations versus CAD with like cutting and whatnot. But if I have a shape and I just want to make a simple cube, all that I need to do is I start by drawing this little blue rectangle, this little square. Start by drawing that, and then we can copy, paste, move orthogonally. Let's change it over to like a purple, or we already have a purple. Let's do green. You will select this, and then you come up to Effect, 3D and Materials, and then I always still do 3D Classic. These ones up here, like Revolve and whatnot, it's more for cartoonization and more for branding, where you're trying to make things look a little more cartoonish. So when in doubt, I highly recommend 3D Classic. We will then come over to Extrude, and then it brings up this panel. And through this panel, really lets you have, different viewpoints. So it's going to be a little hard to see with just a square, but you can change where you want to actually view this thing from. Custom rotation, I can come in here, I can click and drag, it's showing me the wireframe of what I'm looking at. You can always come in here, use your scroll wheel, do a little tweaking. You can even rotate it this way. You can rotate it so many different ways. I can always rotate by locking that one axis and just rotating it around this face and rotate it around that face. Again, just play around with these things, tons of different options. I can make it extrude less by saying 25. I can also use my scroll wheel to change that as well. Plastic shading, wireframe, lots of different things here. This idea is pretty much the same, where I've taken a square, you extrude it, you get a rectangular prism, a cube, whatever. If you want to make a sphere, it's a little bit different. I think the biggest mistake when someone wants to make a sphere in Illustrator is they start by drawing a circle, understandably. They come up to Effect, 3D and Materials, Classic, and then Revolve. And they're like, I'm going to revolve this. And then they get a donut. And they realize, I'm not revolving it around, the center. I'm revolving it around either the left or the right side. As it says from here, from left edge, from right edge, it doesn't change it. It's giving me a donut either way. So if I wanted to make a sphere, you're just instead going to revolve a semicircle. And this is a good time to remind people of how you can make things a little bit faster. So how did I make this semicircle? The really fast way is to just draw a circle, direct selection tool. I can click on that anchor point. So now I just have that one anchor point selected, and I just delete it. Illustrator is really good at interpolating things. So when I deleted this anchor point, the next closest anchor points are these two at the 6 and 12 o'clock positions. So I came in here and I deleted it, and it just decided to connect the 6 and the 12 o'clock positions. So now I have my semicircle. Now when I come back and I revolve this, I did it from the left edge, it's giving me a weird cylinder. I do it from the right edge, it is able to give me a sphere. So basic premise still remains the same. Sometimes people get a little hung up on that, understandably so. But that's how you make your basic 3D objects in Illustrator, revolving and extruding things. Another thing that is really nice is to actually map art onto 3D objects. So in here, we've got the same blue cube from before, but in this case, I've mapped this rainbow on top of it. I will show you using a different map. So let's say I want to put a smiley face character cartoon on top of that little blue box there. So we're going into this concept of mapping art onto 3D objects. So I'll start with a little perfect circle, make another circle here, can give him one eye. We can, if I hold shift, I scale proportionally. If I hold shift and alt, I scale from the center. So I'll make him have a small eye. We can, how do we make a semicircle? Delete that one, bring it in here, and maybe for a nose, we wanted to give him a little nose. Shift X to swap stroke and fill. You can even give him little eyebrows. Who cares? I'm going to take all these, I'm going to group them with Control G. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make Mr. Smiley a symbol. So I've come over here to the symbols panel, this little club, and I'm going to drag him in. And you'll see I have this little blue line here because it's recognizing I want to make him a symbol. We'll call him Mr. Smiley. And so now he's also a symbol. What I can then do is I have a copy of this cube. I come down to the appearances panel, and it tells me everything that I've been doing to that square. Because again, let's go to outline mode, Control Y. It's still showing me a square because under the hood, it's just a square with a lot of effects applied to it. Namely, it's got a fill, and I've added this effect of a 3D bevel to it. I can turn that off. I can just go back to seeing what the base square was. Maybe I wanted to change the shape. So I go direct selection tool, still do the same thing. Keep it live. It's really easy to edit these things as long as you know that those commands exist. So I can have that 3D bevel and extrude. What throws people off very frequently is that they want to edit, they want to put this thing, they want to edit it, whatever. They will select the cube. They will come back to effect, 3D classic, extrude, and it's going to throw an error. It's going to say, I can't do that. The reason Illustrator is confused is because it can't extrude what's already been extruded. So for reference, so how do we make a cube? I take a square, I come over here, I extrude it, and I make it 25, who cares? You can't extrude it again because you made something 2D, 3D. You can't make something that is already 3D, either 4D or even more 3D. So that's why Illustrator is getting confused. It's saying, I've already got something extruded from this. I can't extrude an extrusion. So that's why if you want to edit something that you've already revolved or extrude, you come over to the appearances panel. Again, super useful panel, the appearances panel. And then I just click on extrude bevel, and now I'm able to edit this one that I already had open. And it will show me this blue face. This is the reference one. So what do I want to do? We wanted to map the smiley face onto the blue cube. So we will come over, click here to start editing this. And then there's this option. You'll notice this always controls the orientation of my shape. But what I'm interested in is this map art option in the bottom left corner of the extrude bevel panel. So I'm going to click that. And now it's showing me all the different faces of my object. What's nice about a cube, there's only 6 faces. You'll notice right now I don't have any symbol selected, but it says surface 1 of 6. And I can toggle to different surfaces of the 6 on my cube. I want you to look at what happens over here on the cube when I toggle between these faces, okay? It is showing me with the red highlight what face I'm going to be mapping onto. So this can get crazy if you have a weird shape you've extruded. It's got like 200 faces. It kind of sucks. But Mr. Smiley is going to be really easy to put on the top face. So I just toggle through. I know that this face right here is on the top because it's got that highlighted. So I come over here and I go down to Mr. Smiley. And I can just also say scale to fit. And now he will perfectly fill up the front face of this square. And also, rotate him. I can smush him and do all this other stuff, but I can hit scale to fit. And let's say on the front surface, I wanted that little rainbow symbol. I can also do that, scale to fit, and I've mapped it on. So you don't actually have to have this cube down here. You don't have to try and make, any lips and get it to line up. Do I want to have it, do this? Do I want to have this try and map perfectly? Do I need to direct selection tool and warp it and it doesn't work? All you have to do is make it a symbol first into your symbols panel, and then you'll be able to just map that onto really any surface. Really, really useful for showing assembly of things, where if you have a coating of a surface of a material, if you're in material science, you're able to show certain things, or you can even map on a lattice of some sort. So you can make a hexagonal atomic lattice, make that whole thing a symbol, and then you can come and drop that on top of this thing and really, do whatever you want. But the ability to perfectly map a symbol onto something will save you a lot of time, and it will always look right. So that's the idea for mapping an art to 3D objects.